All right, so we're going to dig into what is an IEP, or Individualized Educational Plan. So first of all, it's important to know that this is a written document and it's legally binding. So when I work with families, I say if it's not in the IEP and it's not signed into the IEP by everyone on the team, then it's not legally binding, right? If it is, then it gives everyone on the team a set of guidelines that must legally be followed. It's a vision of needs. So what does the student need in order to increase their skills, progress in school, and be successful, and hopefully more independent and more prepared for when they exit school eventually. And remember, an IEP can start as young as 3 years old. So they change over time in tone and flavor and what the vision of needs is. They also include measurable goals, and we'll be working on goals and measurement this semester. Suffice to say for right now that we used to draw up goals. So we would have OT goals, right? And then probably about 10, 15 years ago, teams started thinking about it and thinking to themselves, you know what, there's not OT goals and and teacher goals and speech goals and all that kind of stuff. Actually, what there are student goals. And so now we write goals that may be worked on by OT, may be reviewed by OT, but may also involve other folks that are on the educational team. Also in an IEP are special ed and related services and any accommodations that a student would get. So the special ed is, where is the placement? What sort of classroom at what school? The related services, as I said earlier, includes OT, but it may also include other services that are on top of their special ed placement. And then there's statement of accommodations. So, for example, if one of our clients needs to get up and move every hour, that needs to be written into the IEP. If they need a special desk, or they need the environment to be modified in some way, that needs to be written into the IEP. If they need any tools or adaptive equipment, written into the IEP in the Statement of Accommodations. All right, and then we talked about Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE, and the placement, and here's where this becomes legally binding, is that we look at all the possible placements and decide what's going to be the least restrictive and the most appropriate for that student based on the vision of needs and any and all current assessments, both from OT and from other folks. All right, and then finally, there's a transition plan, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but starting at 16 years old. So remember, for the purposes of public education, we can see kids up until their 22nd birthday. We're going to start 5 years early with thinking about transition, right? So we started around 16. We also, just FYI, we think about transitions from preschool to kindergarten, from kindergarten to elementary, elementary to middle school to high school. So there's a lot of transitions. They tend to be pretty, or can be pretty difficult for our clients. And thinking about them in advance and really putting some supports in place makes that process a lot easier. The IEP team, I went through just a couple minutes ago, but it's a group of professionals with a legal framework of relationships and responsibilities. So all a legal process. You have a list of a bunch of the different members of the team in the presenter notes. The team also shares responsibility and accountability for student success in meeting goals. So again, that idea that we have student goals and the whole team is going to decide who's going to work on it, and it could be more than one person, and in fact it should, right, to really reinforce growth, and who's going to measure whether the goal has been met. And in in school-based practice, we typically look at the goals every quarter. So, and have an IEP meeting every year, more often if it's indicated. So that also is a piece of it. And then the final piece for the IEP team is that we are results oriented versus process oriented. So what does that mean? So results are, did they meet their goals? Process is, how did we get there? And the process, we as OTs, we like the process. We like to think about, okay, we're going to work on executive functioning through this method and that curriculum, and by putting in place these supports, and we're going to scaffold, and we're going to forward and backward chain. That's all great. But for the purposes of the IEP team, they only want to know about the results. They don't want to know about how we got there. Certainly, we're going to share that because it's valuable information, but it doesn't belong in the IEP. So the process. Well, a referral happens, and the referral can be made by parents, teachers, or school staff. It can also be made by something called child find, which is a legal requirement for all school districts to locate, find, assess kids who may have disabilities so that they don't slip through the cracks. Then we have an evaluation, and what happens is that an assessment plan gets signed, and then there's a certain period of time that everybody has to complete the evaluation. And typically, well, it happens in a couple of different ways. So it typically happens earlier in a child's life, but it could happen for a youth that, that they either develop something or were not actually identified with an issue, and then they get evaluated. But in any case, an evaluation happens. That includes evaluations from the teacher about academics. It includes a school-based psych evaluation, OT, and whoever else is evaluating. Then there's an eligibility review. And so in the eligibility review, it is determined not by OT, but by the psychologist or perhaps a psychiatrist. There are 13 categories which make a child or youth eligible for an IEP, and their school performance must be adversely affected by one of these 13 conditions. And you can read about all those conditions in the presenter notes, but I'll give you a few high points. So autism, blindness or deafness, emotionally disturbed, visual or hearing impaired, intellectual disability, orthopedics, other health impaired, learning disabilities, which are very common to see in the schools, etc. So the eligibility is determined by all providers, and then if it is determined that the student qualifies for an IEP because of the assessment results under one of these 13 categories, they get an IEP developed. If they don't qualify under one of those 13 categories, they do not get an IEP developed. So they're eligible. We come up with goals. We come up with both academic and non-academic goals as the child or youth warrants, based on their needs. And then once the parent has a chance to review the plan, ask any questions, modify and ring in on the goals until everyone is satisfied that, yes, this is a good plan, then they sign the IEP, and then it can be implemented. Then we provide services. And once again, we're a related service. We're not standalone. And then there's an annual review, as I said a little earlier, and a tri-annual reevaluation. So the annual review is Everyone gets together. We've looked at the students' goals. We have determined to what extent they've met those goals, come up with proposed new goals, written a report talking about anything else that bears mentioning in terms of their progress. And then we make a recommendation: continue services, change the services around, either increase or decrease the frequency or the nature of the service. Maybe we were direct and now we need to be indirect. Maybe we need to, So we may change services. We may recommend for discharge. So we're making recommendations. We come back together at this annual review and we decide for the next year what's going to happen in terms of this student's educational program. Now, every 3 years, the student needs to re-qualify for an IEP and for ongoing special ed services. And so we do a bigger process of evaluation. We do testing again, and we see where we're at. The one other thing I want to tell you is that in this annual review, triannual re-eval, those might be the only times that the IEP team convenes, but the parent or caregiver or legal guardian has the right to convene an IEP meeting at any time, and honestly, so does anybody else. But typically, the parent or caregiver would be the one that would be empowered to do that, and may be the one that would really want to do that. All right. Come on. So, the IEP and school-based occupational therapy. I've said it before, I'll say it again. OT is a related service. It enables the student to benefit from special ed. There must be one of these two criteria met: either one or more areas of particularly low function, lower than their overall function, or they're not able to access their special education program without additional assistance from OT. So one or the other of those criteria need to be met in order to get school-based OT. It also needs to be educationally relevant, right? So stuff that has nothing to do with school or success in school or participation in school cannot get paid for by school OT. All right, so moving on, now we're going to talk about the individualized transition plan. And as we said earlier, by 16 years of age, we're going to be looking at that. It facilitates the transition from high school out into the world or into higher ed. It is a process that starts when a student is 14, right? So by 16, we actually have this plan, this legal document, but when a student is 14 years old, we want to start thinking, what do we think? What do we think about their ability to function independently? Where do we think they're going? So we start talking about it really early, and then we can effect some change or direct our efforts as necessary. And the ITP may include information about education, employment or vocational training, community mobility, so like taking bus, learning to drive, Uber, etc., and independent living skills, that's what ILS stands for, and social participation. So we're going to look at all of those areas. The ITP areas, as I just said, include post-secondary education, so in other words, college, community college, vocational school, a number of different types of continuing ed, employment, and that includes developing vocational skills, job training and searching, community mobility to get to a job site, and money management, which is important. So think about it, we're starting to look at a lot of IADLs, right? Also, independent living skills, which include IADLs again. Living options. Is the student going to remain at home? Are they going to be in a sheltered environment? Are they going to get their own apartment, live with other relatives? What's going to happen? Community supports, so potentially a social worker or case manager out in the community. Training and preparation for household responsibilities. Can they cook their own meals? Can they clean up? Can they shop? Financial management, not only in terms of money, but also having a bank account, potentially having a credit card, etc. And then self-determination skills. So those include a lot of different kinds of skills, knowledge, and beliefs that enable a person to be autonomous, to be self-directed in the world. It includes things like problem solving and decision making. It includes things about having positive self-worth and self-esteem so that you're actually able to motivate to do some of these other things. And OT makes a really good professional to address this stuff, right? We're already looking at IADLs. We're already looking at education, and we can just like gently broaden our parameters to include how can we foster self-esteem, right? How can we increase self-determination and empower youth to optimize their potential? So there's a great need for transition services. It increases the chances of success after high school. If we wait until the student is graduating high school, it's kind of too late, right? We need this plan, and we need to really kind of like feather the nest with this plan as a kid is going through high school. It also helps prepare the student for community engagement, employment, and higher ed. And the transition services really, like I said, when you're 14, if we really start putting a focus on independent living skills, that can be key to actually increasing the likelihood that those things will be goals that are met.